Thank you, Mr. Chair. Rather tepid applause for 11:15 at night, but it is my privilege to rise today and question the minister. I would like to begin by thanking him for his service. Certainly, I respect the career he had in the Canadian Armed Forces, and I think that experience is formative for someone serving in the capacity of Minister of National Defence, and I want to thank him and recognize that at the outset. I do want to say a brief speech first, Mr. Speaker, before I get into my questions. I do want to say that many members of the Canadian Armed Forces, while very happy and proud of the Minister's service, are indeed very worried about the future of the Canadian Armed Forces, the capability, operations and equipment. And they have good reason to, Mr. Speaker. The parallels between the last majority Liberal government to see in this place and this one are stark and startling. In 1993, the election was dominated by the delay and eventual cancellation of the maritime helicopter replacement, a project that the minister is still talking about replacing because of the quite frankly, misguided move in that election by Prime Minister Chrétien to cancel the Sea King helicopter. The year after they were elected in 1994, they had a defence white paper to basically set up the future cuts to the military. And I'll quote the lines from that 1994 white paper. It ends saying, indeed, whatever the future brings, the new defence policy will enable Canada to respond and adjust as necessary to deal with a range of challenges to our security that could arise now and into the next century. Fast forward to this present government, Mr. Chair. The F-35 became the large procurement project that became the sort of item that was used as a political football in a campaign. And then a year after this government assumes office, we have a defence review, again setting up the circumstances for future cuts, Mr. Speaker. And in the launch of that review, the minister said, the strategic security environment in which the Canadian Armed Forces operates has changed significantly. Sounds very familiar. I look forward to hearing from Canadians from coast to coast as they help inform the modern development of modern defence policy that will support the Canadian Armed Forces to effectively respond to a full spectrum of challenges, same language, now and into the future. And, of course, the roadmap to cuts is already there for him because the Chief Government Whip has outlined in his transformation report before he joined this Parliament a guide to cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces, basically a 50% cut to Class B reserves and cost-cutting measures. So with this comparison in mind, how can the men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces, Minister, trust that we do not see the beginning of another era or decade of darkness?
Of National Defence.
Mr. Chair, first of all, I do want to thank the member for his service, and in particular, the empathy that he brought to the file when he was Minister of Veterans Affairs. It was greatly appreciated by veterans from his predecessor. And I can assure the member, our government is committed to supporting our troops, making sure they have all the full capability, and working diligently. And I've also, talking about previous governments, we are facing capability gaps. We should have had a fighter replacement now, rather than trying to keep extending our CF-18s. When it comes to the transformation report, if you look at a lot of the cuts, there were a lot of cuts that were done in the past. But instead of me getting into the laundry list of that, what I want to do is give confidence to Canadians and to the opposition that our government is fully committed to supporting our men and women, making sure that the money that has been reprofiled for the future is strictly reserved for the Canadian Armed Forces, so they have all the capabilities that they need for their future threats. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
The minister mentioned the fighter replacement project. I'd ask the minister if he knows which government started the replacement process for the F-30 or F-18 replacement?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
The previous government, Mr. Chair, but it's instead of talking about starting it, we should talk about
who's going to
finishing it. And at the end of the day, it's our responsibility to have a replacement for the F-18, and we are committed to do that.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Respectfully, I'll correct the minister. It was the Chrétien government that brought the Joint Strike Fighter participation, along with countries like Australia and other allies, into what became the F-35 acquisition project. Would it be fair to say, Minister, when you change procurement processes midstream, you essentially delay receiving that equipment for a generation?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, yes, I stand corrected on the particular government, but I can assure the member right now we do need to replace the current F-18, and we need to do it quickly to making sure that our the men and women in the Air Force have the aircraft that they need to carry out all the missions. Thank you.
Member for Durham.
Given the track record, Mr. Speaker, as a former Sea King guy myself, we're flying these into their fifth decade of service. Would it not be best to choose a fighter not just for today, but that allows for a broad range of capabilities 30 years from now?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, not only should we be picking an aircraft that's going to take us into the future, but we need to be investing in potentially into our industry, looking at 1 to 2 steps beyond into future capabilities. I'm happy to discuss many other aspects of the various programs, but we need to even look even further and making sure there's adaptability into some of our procurement.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
So, Mr. Speaker, or Mr. Chair, if I could summarize what the minister is saying is, we are not sure the operations say in 2030, so we need a versatile, interoperable aircraft that is potentially a dominant aircraft 20 years from now. Does that not sound like the F-35s as opposed to an updated version of a 1970s or 80s fighter?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, as I stated, we are committed to replacing the CF-18. In terms of the F-35, I encourage the member to read a lot of the independent reports that are coming out from the U.S. government as well with some of the challenges. These are some of the things that we are taking into consideration. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure we fill this capability gap, and we will get a fighter that's going to meet the needs, that's going to extend much into the future.
As a maritime helicopter guy, I should stop all this focus on a fighter and move on. The minister in his estimates and in the budget has outlined capital cuts to the Canadian Armed Forces of $3.7 billion, estimate reduction of $300 million, and specific cuts to combat and support operations of $59 million. That's the information we're looking today. Why has the minister made such significant cuts before the defense review has started?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, our government has not made cuts. As I stated, the money is reprofiled for the future. In fact, we have actually increased our budget, kept the planned increases of 2%, which is $361 million. That goes to operations that allows our men and women to be able to operate. In addition, we are putting in another $200 million for infrastructure as well. Plus, the Operation Impact mission is also $360 million. We are investing into the operations of the Canadian Armed Forces.
It's important to focus here. I'm not talking just capital costs and procurement. There's a specific $59 million cut to combat and support operations. That's an operational cut. So can the minister confirm that is indeed a reduction or a cut?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, with the exact question and the number, I can't have an answer for the member, but when it comes to there are significant differences of how the budget does change. I can assure the member the direction I have given the department, there will be no cuts. We have kept the increases, the planned increases for the military, and making sure that our men and women have the money to be able to conduct operations.
Honourable Member.
I'd refer the minister to page 170 of the estimates for that specific cut, but I'll refer back to his statement for the defense review. He's looking to conduct the defense review to help inform the development of a modern defense policy. But it's clear he's already making cuts and procurement reprofilings before this defense review. So does this mean there are more cuts or reductions coming after the review?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, we're not making any cuts to procurement. In fact, the procurement schedule that we've had, which is inherited from the previous government, which is what we are moving along with. What we did was making sure that we protected the money for these procurements. However, we're working diligently, trying to move projects faster, and if we are successful, we will be able to reprofile that money back for procurement.
Honourable Member.
the minister did indeed inherit some stuff from the previous government, and that was actually what he was showcasing in terms of the good news here tonight. So in response to questions from the Parliament Secretary for Public Works, he outlined improvements to the CP 140, Halifax class modernizations, even the temporary tanker replacement with the Davie Shipyard. Can the minister confirm to this House that those new projects, that good news, are actually the programs he inherited from the previous government?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, besides for the frigate modernization, I don't consider the interim AOR as actually a good news story. We have a capability gap where we're renting resupply from other nations right now. That is a capability gap. And but nonetheless, we're committed to the national shipbuilding strategy. We're moving forward with it with the interim AOR and the joint supply ships.
The Honourable Member for Durham.
Mr. Chair, going back to my concern about the minister's cuts operationally and procurement-wise before his defence review, it concerned me that tonight, in response to my colleague from Edmonton West, his response about reprofiling money, he said, I quote, "We will reprofile the money back if and when it is needed." So is the minister confirming to this House that there's a very good chance as a result of this review that none of that almost $4 billion will come back into the fiscal framework?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, what I was expressing there is in terms of the procurement schedule, if we have an opportunity to have certain procurement projects to move faster and we're able to purchase sooner, is able to take that money and reprofile it back so we can have a capability sooner. That's a good news story, and we should be focused on that rather than wait to the later years later years from what I inherited in terms of the procurement schedule. I want to be able to make sure that we have capabilities as quickly as possible, and we're working diligently to make that happen.
For Durham.
Mr. Chair, the one difference, in fact, why I'm so worried about another era of darkness for the military is that Minister Collinette in the Chrétien government at least waited until the white paper was completed before the rounds of cuts. 20%. So we already have significant cuts, delays to procurement before the defence review itself, Mr. Speaker. So if the defence review process recommends a streamlining or transformation in the full-time employees or FTEs within the Department of National Defence, will the minister cut personnel levels within the Canadian Armed Forces, much like they did in the mid-90s?
Minister of Defence.
Mr. Chair, as I stated before, I have no intention of cutting the personnel levels. We're conducting that defence review, and in terms of the schedule of procurement, this is a schedule that I inherited. So in terms of the actual reprofiling the money, all I've done is taken the schedule that existed within the department, and I'm making sure that this money is protected and for the years that we need we need to spend it. And if I can move those projects in a much quicker fashion, then we will have that requested to reprofile it back so we can have the purchase of the project and bring in a capability even sooner.
Based on this pace, we have time for two more questions. The Honourable Member for Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The fixed-wing SAR process is something that the minister provided a 2-year time frame to completion, or at least announcement of that aircraft. I'm wondering, why was that project specifically chosen to be immune from the delays or the reprofiling of monies, particularly when we have a variety of SAR assets already covering that capability? Why were certain programs taken out of the procurement freeze? What was his rationale for that one not to be frozen?
The Honourable Member for, the Honourable Minister.
Mr. Chair, the fixed-wing SAR program already had considerable delays in the past. Search and rescue is a critical component of the Canadian Armed Forces that provide that service, and we need to make sure that our troops have the right aircraft for it. Like I said, it already had considerable delays, and there was no procurement freeze put on this. And we need to make sure that, as Canadians expect, they don't care what aircraft or Coast Guard or its military that provides, we provide an essential service, and we need to make sure that our men and women have the capability for this.
One more quick question. The Honourable Member for Durham.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Minister, for your answers tonight. I'm going to end much in how I began, comparing it to the decade of darkness under the Chrétien Liberals, where they cancelled the Sea King as part of the election campaign. And the irony is the minister will now be landing simulators and receiving the Cyclone. So a generation, over 25 years later, Mr. Chair, we're finally receiving a replacement aircraft because of the political decision in 1993. Can the minister confirm to the fighter community and to the Royal Canadian Air Force that we're not going to see the same political games where we will have a next-generation fighter not online until 20, 30 years from now?
Minister of Defense.
Mr. Chair, as I stated, some of the capability gaps that I have inherited in terms of the F-18, it's on a separate track from the defense review and making sure that we move on this quickly as possible. And my department is working very closely with the Minister of Procurement to rectify this. And I hope to be able to move this process along efficiently and quickly so that we can have a aircraft that can suit the needs for our men and women in the Air Force. Thank you, Mr. Chair.